Welcome to the first episode of How to use Tespect. Today we want to show you how to use the basic functions of Tespect. At first, let's have a look at the example which should be modeled with Tespect today. The requirement is to save the information of a program persistently. First of all, we have to create a subject area, which is comparable with an Eclipse project. In this example, we want to create a subject area for testing a database, so we name it DB connection. In this subject area, we will define our aspects, rules, and generate test cases. Now we try to find aspects of this requirement. An aspect, in the sense of Tespect, is a part of a requirement that should be tested to ensure that the product meets the requirements. To sort our aspects, Tespect provides two hierarchy levels, which are parent aspect and leaf aspect. For our requirement, we find the parent aspect DB address and login. We put them into the subject area by selecting the subject area in the tree and clicking this button, naming it login, and the second one, which can be alternatively added over edit new aspect, and which is named DB address. The first parent aspect contains two leaf aspects, which are username and password. We add them by selecting the parent aspect and clicking the button again. Username is the first leaf aspect. The second is password. The DB address contains two leaf aspects as well, which are IP or computer name. Now that we have the structure of our subject area, we have to think of concrete values for each leaf aspect. In the sense of Tespect, we call them leaf values. To add a leaf value to a leaf aspect, select the leaf aspect and choose a predefined value or define your own value. Furthermore, you can add a description which is really helpful if the test cases are designed and executed by different persons. For very technical aspects, like in our example, you even can enter a range. So you can define what is a valid IP. For the aspect computer name, we will add predefined values, which may be server MS, which is a Microsoft server, or server Lin, which is a Linux server named exactly like this. For the aspects username and password, we just choose valid or invalid, because the entered username to access the database could be valid or invalid. After we have defined our aspects, we now start the permutation. This permutation is the Cartesian product of all leaf values. The combination is shown in the Permutation tab. Start the permutation by clicking this button. So you now see them in the permutation panel. It is easy to imagine that there are combinations which exclude each other or which are equivalent. Furthermore, This 8 leaf values produces 16 test cases, so that a large sample would be to increase the number of test cases quickly to over 1,000 or 10,000 test cases. To eliminate this senseless test cases, we are able to create rules. To create a rule, select Edit, New Rule. First of all, you have to distinguish between exclusion or equivalence rule. Let's start with an exclusion rule. On the next wizard step, we have to decide which leaf aspects contain the leaf values which exclude each other. For example, it is easy to imagine that the address of the database server can only be an IP or a computer name, so there will be no test case with a valid IP and a computer name. In the next step, we have to decide the leaf value of the both leaf aspects displayed here and here, which exclude each other. So there will never be a valid IP address and a computer name like this. With clicking the next button, the wizard proposes a rule name. We can edit it or not. Now the rule is first of all shown in our tree, and furthermore there is a special tab which is called exclusion that shows the permutation after applying the exclusion rule. As you can see, our rule which says that there is no valid IP and a Microsoft server, you see that there are only invalid IP addresses within Microsoft server. With a Linux server, at the moment there can even be both a valid IP address and a server named Linux. So we can add another rule which excludes the second case. So there will be no valid IP and a server name like Linux. So now there are only 8 test cases left. Now let's try to create another rule, an equivalence rule. For our example, it is easy to imagine that it's the same if we enter a wrong password and a correct username, or if we enter a correct password and a wrong username. So we select username and password as our leaf aspects. Now we have to define which combination of these two is equivalent to another combination of the same two. So we can say an invalid username with an invalid password leads to a failed login. On the other hand, a valid username with an invalid password leads to a failed login as well. By clicking the next button, the wizard will propose a rule name again. As you can see in the equivalence tab, there are only 9 test cases left. So we exclude 7 of them because they are equivalent. On the tab which is called both, there are only those test cases left which make sense. So both rules are applied on the permutation, and there are only 5 test cases left. Now you know about the basic functions of Tespect. If the example does not match your daily business, or if you have any additional questions, feel free to contact info@tespect.de or visit www.tespect.de.